Imagine waking up one morning and being told that your entire city must be emptied in 24 hours. No explanation, no mercy. Millions of people, doctors, teachers, engineers, even children were forced at gunpoint to march into the jungle where most of them would never return. This wasn't a war. This wasn't a natural disaster. This was the vision of one man, Pol Pot. In just 4 years, he turned Cambodia into a living nightmare and killed nearly 2 million people, a quarter of the entire population. How did a quiet student who studied in Paris become one of history's most brutal mass murderers? Stay with me. This is one of the darkest stories of the 20th century. Pol Pot remains one of the most chilling figures of the 20th century, a man whose vision of radical social transformation led to immense human suffering. His name is often spoken alongside the darkest chapters of modern history, not just because of the scale of destruction he oversaw, but because of the methodical and ideological nature of that destruction. To understand how this happened, it helps to trace his story from the beginning, long before he became the leader of a regime responsible for the deaths of nearly 2 million people in Cambodia. Pol Pot was born as Salath Sar in 1925 in a rural area of Cambodia, then part of French Indochina. His family was relatively well off compared to many peasants in the region. They owned land and had connections to the royal court, which meant that his early life was not marked by extreme hardship. This detail matters because it complicates the common assumption that revolutionary leaders always emerge from deep poverty. In Pol Pot's case, his later ideology was not simply a reaction to deprivation, but something shaped by education, exposure, and radicalization. As a child, he was sent to live with relatives in Phnom Penh, where he received a formal education. He attended a French-language school, which placed him within the colonial system that governed Cambodia at the time. However, he was not an outstanding student. Reports suggest he struggled academically and failed some of his exams. Despite this, he managed to secure a scholarship to study in France in 1949. This opportunity would prove to be a turning point in his life. In Paris, Pol Pot was exposed to a wide range of political ideas. The post-war period in Europe was filled with debates about socialism, communism, colonialism, and national liberation. Many students from colonized countries found themselves drawn to revolutionary ideologies, seeing them as tools to break free from European control. Pol Pot became involved with a group of Cambodian students who were interested in Marxist thought. He joined communist circles and began to adopt increasingly radical views. Interestingly, he did not excel in his academic studies in France either. He was enrolled in a technical program but eventually failed his exams and lost his scholarship. Yet while his formal education faltered, his political education intensified. He read Marxist literature, participated in discussions, and developed a belief that Cambodia needed a complete and immediate transformation. He was especially influenced by the idea that society could be rebuilt from the ground up, eliminating class distinctions entirely. When he returned to Cambodia in the early 1950s, the country was in a period of transition. It had recently gained independence from France, and political factions were competing for power. Pol Pot joined the underground communist movement, which would later become known as the Khmer Rouge. He proved to be a disciplined and secretive figure, qualities that helped him gain trust among his peers. By the 1960s, he had become one of the key leaders of the movement. A major turning point came when he and other communist leaders fled to the countryside to avoid government crackdowns. There, they began organizing rural support, focusing on peasants rather than urban workers. This strategy differed from traditional Marxist approaches, which emphasized the industrial proletariat. Pol Pot believed that Cambodia's largely agrarian population made peasants the true revolutionary force. During this period, his ideas became more extreme. He developed a vision of a society without cities, money, or modern institutions. He believed that returning to a purely agrarian way of life would create equality and eliminate exploitation. This was not just a political program, it was an attempt to completely erase existing social structures and rebuild them according to his interpretation of communist ideology. The Cambodian Civil War in the late 1960s and early 1970s created the conditions that allowed the Khmer Rouge to grow. The conflict was complicated by the involvement of external powers, including the United States, which carried out heavy bombing campaigns in Cambodia during the Vietnam War. These bombings destabilized rural areas and contributed to resentment against the government. The Khmer Rouge used this instability to recruit supporters, presenting themselves as a force for national liberation. By 1975, the Khmer Rouge had gained enough strength to capture Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia. This marked the beginning of Pol Pot's rule. What followed was one of the most radical and devastating social experiments in history. Almost immediately after taking power, the Khmer Rouge ordered the evacuation of cities. Millions of people were forced to leave their homes and march into the countryside. The regime claimed this was necessary to build an agrarian utopia, but in reality, it led to widespread suffering. People were separated from their families, deprived of basic necessities, and subjected to forced labor. The new government abolished money, closed schools, banned religion, and eliminated private property. Intellectuals, professionals, and anyone perceived as educated were targeted. Even wearing glasses could be seen as a sign of intellectualism and could result in execution. The regime sought to create a classless society, but in doing so, it treated entire groups of people as enemies. Pol Pot's leadership was characterized by extreme paranoia. He believed that enemies were everywhere, both inside and outside the country. This led to widespread purges within the Khmer Rouge itself. Thousands of party members were arrested, tortured, and executed based on suspicions of disloyalty. One of the most infamous sites of this terror was the Tuol Sleng prison, where prisoners were subjected to brutal interrogations before being killed. The scale of suffering during this period is difficult to comprehend. People died from execution, starvation, disease, and exhaustion. Agricultural policies were poorly planned and often unrealistic, leading to food shortages. Despite these failures, the regime continued to demand impossible production targets, punishing those who could not meet them. What made Pol Pot particularly dangerous was his unwavering commitment to his ideology. He did not see the suffering as a failure of his policies, but as a necessary sacrifice. In his view, the creation of a pure, equal society justified extreme measures. This mindset allowed the regime to continue its destructive practices, even as the human cost became undeniable. The fall of Pol Pot's regime came in 1979, when Vietnam invaded Cambodia. Tensions between the two countries had been escalating, and the Khmer Rouge had carried out attacks on Vietnamese border areas. Vietnam responded with a full-scale invasion, quickly defeating Khmer Rouge forces and capturing Phnom Penh. Pol Pot and his remaining followers fled into the jungle regions near the Thai border. Although they lost control of the country, the Khmer Rouge continued to operate as a guerrilla movement for years. Pol Pot remained a significant figure within the group, though his influence gradually declined. In the years that followed, Cambodia began the long process of recovery. The new government, backed by Vietnam, attempted to rebuild the country and address the aftermath of the genocide. However, the presence of the Khmer Rouge as an insurgent force complicated these efforts. Pol Pot lived in relative isolation during this period. Reports suggest that he continued to exert influence within the remnants of the Khmer Rouge, but he was no longer the central figure he once was. Internal divisions weakened the movement, and by the late 1990s, it was on the verge of collapse. In 1997, Pol Pot was placed under house arrest by his own comrades after a power struggle within the Khmer Rouge. This marked a dramatic fall from the position of absolute authority he once held. He spent his final days in a remote area, cut off from the broader world. Pol Pot died in 1998, reportedly from heart failure. There were also rumors that he may have taken his own life to avoid capture, but the exact circumstances remain unclear. His death did not bring closure to the many victims of his regime, but it did mark a chapter in Cambodia's history. Today, Pol Pot is remembered as one of the most brutal dictators of the modern era. His rule serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of extreme ideology combined with absolute power. In Cambodia, the legacy of his regime is still deeply felt. Memorials, museums, and survivor testimonies continue to preserve the memory of what happened, ensuring that future generations understand the consequences of such actions. His story is not just about one man, but about how ideas, when taken to extremes and enforced without regard for human life, can lead to catastrophe. It raises difficult questions about ideology, leadership, and the conditions that allow such regimes to emerge. While history cannot be changed, understanding it is essential to preventing similar tragedies in the future. In the end, Pol Pot's life is a cautionary tale. It shows how a combination of ambition, belief, and circumstance can lead to unimaginable outcomes. His vision of a perfect society resulted instead in widespread suffering and loss, leaving a legacy that continues to haunt Cambodia and the world. If you found this video informative and want to see more deep historical documentaries like this one, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. And before you go, take a moment to check out the recommended videos appearing on your screen right now. They continue exploring some of the darkest and most important stories from modern history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.